Marcus Chen had been training at Dragon's Breath Martial Arts Academy for exactly 8 months when his world turned upside down on a humid Tuesday evening in July. The 24-year-old software engineer had stumbled into martial arts almost by accident, initially signing up for a beginner's self-defense class after his apartment building experienced a string of break-ins. What started as a practical necessity had quickly evolved into something much deeper. Marcus found himself drawn to the discipline, the mental focus, and the physical challenge that came with learning traditional martial arts. The academy specialized in a blend of techniques, combining elements of karate, jiu-jitsu, and kickboxing into what the instructors called practical combat training. The dojo itself was nothing fancy. A converted warehouse space with thick blue mats covering most of the concrete floor, mirrors lining one wall, and heavy bags hanging from reinforced ceiling beams. The air always carried the scent of sweat and the rubber from the mats, a combination that had become oddly comforting to Marcus over the months. Master Elena Vasquez ran the academy with an iron fist wrapped in genuine care for her students. At 38, she was a formidable woman who had competed professionally in mixed martial arts before transitioning to teaching. Her reputation in the local martial arts community was legendary. Not just for her technical skill, but for her ability to push students beyond what they thought possible. Elena stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her presence filled any room she entered. Her black hair was always pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her dark eyes seemed to see right through any excuse or weakness a student might try to hide behind. Despite her intimidating demeanor during training, she was known for her dry sense of humor and genuine investment in each student's progress. Marcus had worked his way up through the ranks steadily, earning his yellow belt 3 months prior. He was naturally athletic, having played soccer in college. But martial arts demanded a different kind of coordination and mental discipline. Where soccer was about flow and teamwork, martial arts was about precision, timing, and individual mastery. The other students had welcomed Marcus into their tight-knit community. There was Sarah, a nurse who used martial arts to decompress from her stressful job. Tommy, a college kid who was working toward his black belt. And Janet, a retired teacher in her 60s, who moved with surprising grace and power. They had become his training partners and friends, pushing each other to improve while maintaining a supportive atmosphere. On this particular Tuesday, the regular evening class had just finished. Marcus was gathering his gear, satisfied with a solid session working on defensive combinations, when Master Elena called out to him from across the dojo. "Marcus, hold up for a minute." He turned, still catching his breath from the intense workout. Elena was dismissing the last few students, her voice carrying its usual authority mixed with warmth. As the dojo emptied out, she walked over to where Marcus stood near the equipment storage area. "How are you feeling about your progress lately?" she asked, crossing her arms and studying his face. Marcus considered the question seriously. Elena never asked idle questions, and he had learned that honest self-assessment was crucial in martial arts training. "I feel like I'm getting stronger, more confident with the basic techniques," he said. "But I know I still hesitate sometimes, especially when we're doing free-form sparring. I overthink instead of just reacting." Elena nodded approvingly. "Good awareness. That hesitation is normal at your level, but it's also the biggest barrier to your next breakthrough. You've got solid fundamentals now, but you need to learn to trust them under real pressure." She paused, seeming to weigh something in her mind. "I've been thinking about your development, and I believe you're ready for a different kind of challenge. Most students at your level only spar with other students around their skill level, but sometimes, to really push past that mental barrier, you need to face something that scares you a little." Marcus felt his heart rate pick up slightly. Elena's challenges were never arbitrary. She had an uncanny ability to know exactly what each student needed to grow, even when they didn't see it themselves. "What did you have in mind?" he asked. "I want you to spar with me. Not next week. Not next month. Right now, while your mind doesn't have time to build it up into something bigger than it is." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus had seen Elena demonstrate techniques countless times, had watched her spar with advanced students and visiting instructors. She moved with a fluid precision that made everything look effortless, but he knew the power and skill behind those movements. Okay. he heard himself saying before his rational mind could talk him out of it. What should I expect? Elena's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained sharp and focused. I'll control the intensity to match your level, but I won't go easy on you. The point isn't to beat you up. It's to force you to react instinctively instead of thinking through every move. You need to learn to trust your training when the pressure is real. She gestured toward the center of the mat. 5 minutes. Light contact only. Focus on movement, timing, and combinations. Don't worry about winning or losing. Worry about staying present and responding naturally. Marcus nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. He dropped his gear bag and walked to the center of the mat, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. This was exactly the kind of opportunity he had been hoping for, even if he hadn't realized it until now. Elena followed him to the center, rolling her shoulders and stretching her neck with casual efficiency. Remember your breathing, she said, settling into a relaxed fighting stance. And remember that I want you to succeed. This is about growth, not conquest. Marcus took his position, raising his hands and trying to find the balance between tension and relaxation that had been drilled into him over months of training. Across from him, Elena looked completely at ease, as if she were about to go through a gentle warm-up routine rather than spar with a student who was clearly out of his depth. Ready? She asked. Marcus nodded, knowing that whatever happened in the next 5 minutes would be a defining moment in his martial arts journey. The first few seconds of the sparring match passed in a blur of nervous energy and rapid heartbeats. Marcus circled to his left, hands up in the defensive position Elena had taught him months ago, trying to read her movements and anticipate her first attack. Elena moved with the fluid confidence of someone completely comfortable in her own skin, her feet gliding across the mat in small, controlled steps. She came in with a slow jab, telegraphing the movement enough that Marcus could see it coming and react. He slipped to the right and countered with a straight punch aimed at her midsection. Elena caught his wrist gently, redirected his momentum, and tapped his ribs with her free hand. Good reaction time, she said, stepping back to reset. But watch your balance on the counter. They separated and began circling again. Marcus felt some of his initial nervousness fading as he realized Elena truly was controlling the pace to match his abilities. This wasn't about her showing off her superior skills. It was a carefully calibrated learning experience. The next exchange lasted longer. Elena threw a combination of punches that forced Marcus to block and move. Testing his defensive reflexes, he managed to deflect most of her attacks and even landed a light kick to her thigh that made her nod approvingly. Better, she said. You're starting to flow instead of thinking through each move. By the 3rd minute, Marcus was finding his rhythm. The months of training were paying off, as his body began to respond automatically to Elena's movements. He was no longer overthinking every defensive reaction or offensive opportunity. When Elena threw a high kick, he ducked and moved in with a body shot. When she pressed forward with hand combinations, he gave ground and looked for openings to counter. Elena increased the pace slightly, testing his ability to maintain composure under greater pressure. Her strikes came faster now, though still controlled and precise. Marcus found himself breathing harder, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead, but he felt exhilarated rather than overwhelmed. This is what I wanted to see, Elena called out, as they separated after another exchange. You're trusting your training now. The turning point came in the 4th minute. Elena had been gradually increasing the intensity, and Marcus was rising to meet the challenge. He felt more confident than he had ever felt during sparring, moving and reacting with a fluidity that surprised even him. Elena came in with what appeared to be a straight punch toward his chest. Marcus had seen this setup before in practice. It was often a feint designed to draw out a defensive reaction that would leave an opening for a follow-up attack. Instead of simply blocking, he decided to be more aggressive. Marcus slipped the punch and stepped in with a counter combination he had been working on in class. A left hook to the body, followed by a right cross toward the head. It was a more advanced technique than he usually attempted, but his confidence was high, and Elena had been encouraging him to be more dynamic. The body shot landed cleanly, though with light contact as agreed upon. Elena absorbed it without difficulty and began to counter. But Marcus was already committed to the second part of his combination. His right cross was coming forward when Elena's response reached him. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was Elena's lightning-fast reaction time. As his right hand moved toward her head level, she was already ducking and pivoting to her left. At the same time, she threw an uppercut that was intended to slip under his extended arm and make light contact with his solar plexus. The timing went wrong in the space between heartbeats. Marcus's forward momentum carried him lower than Elena expected, just as her uppercut was reaching full extension. Instead of the controlled tap to his midsection that she had intended, her fist caught him squarely in the jaw with significantly more force than either of them had planned. The impact sent a shockwave through Marcus's entire head. His vision flashed white for a moment, and he felt his legs go weak beneath him. The blow hadn't been intentionally hard, but the unexpected nature of the contact and the perfect placement had multiplied its effect. Marcus stumbled backward, his hands dropping as he tried to regain his balance and clear his head. Elena immediately stopped her advance, her face showing instant concern as she realized what had happened. "Marcus, are you okay?" But Marcus was having trouble processing what was happening around him. The world seemed to be moving slightly slower than it should, and there was a ringing in his ears that made Elena's voice sound distant and muffled. He took another step backward, trying to shake off the disorientation. His foot caught the edge of a mat that had shifted slightly during their movement around the space. Already off balance from the unexpected blow, Marcus felt himself falling backward. He threw his arms out instinctively to break his fall, but his reflexes were still compromised from the strike to his jaw. Elena lunged forward, trying to catch him before he hit the ground, but she was too far away to reach him in time. Marcus landed hard on his back, his right arm extended, and his shoulder taking much of the impact against the mat. The pain was immediate and severe. Something in his shoulder joint had shifted wrong when he landed, and now even the slightest movement sent sharp bolts of agony through his upper body. Marcus lay still for a moment, trying to assess the damage while fighting off waves of nausea from both the blow to his head and the injury to his shoulder. Elena was beside him in seconds, kneeling on the mat with her face etched in concern and guilt. "Don't move," she said firmly. "Just breathe for a minute and tell me what hurts." Marcus tried to sit up but immediately regretted the movement as fire shot through his shoulder joint. "My shoulder," he managed to say through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong with my shoulder." Elena's expression grew more troubled as she carefully examined his position without touching the injured area. Her years of training and teaching had given her enough experience with injuries to recognize when something was seriously wrong. "I think you may have dislocated your shoulder in the fall," she said quietly. "We need to get you to a hospital to have it properly examined and treated." The reality of the situation began to sink in for both of them. What had started as a controlled training exercise to help Marcus overcome his hesitation in sparring had gone completely wrong through a combination of bad timing, miscommunication, and simple bad luck. Elena pulled out her phone to call for help while staying close to Marcus, monitoring his condition and trying to keep him comfortable. The confidence and authority that usually defined her demeanor had been replaced by obvious distress over her role in the accident. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," she said as they waited for the paramedics. "This should never have happened. I misjudged the distance and the timing completely." Marcus, despite his pain and disorientation, could see how much the accident was affecting Elena. Through the haze of his injury, he found himself more concerned about her obvious distress than about his own situation. "It wasn't your fault," he said weakly. "These things happen in martial arts. We both know the risks." But Elena was clearly unconvinced by his attempt at reassurance, and Marcus could see that she was taking full responsibility for the accident that had transformed a promising training session into a medical emergency. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat on the edge of a treatment table in the emergency room of St. Mary's Hospital. His right arm cradled gingerly against his chest. The initial examination had been encouraging. The X-rays showed no fractures, and while his shoulder was definitely injured from the fall, the emergency room doctor believed it was likely a severe strain rather than a full dislocation. "You were lucky, doctor," Jennifer Walsh had told him after reviewing the images. "The impact definitely stretched some ligaments and caused significant inflammation. But the joint appears to be in its proper position." We'll need to keep it immobilized for a few days and see how the swelling responds to treatment. Elena had stayed with him throughout the entire ordeal, riding in the ambulance and pacing nervously in the waiting room while he was being examined. Her usual composed demeanor had been completely shattered by the accident, and she had barely spoken during the ride to the hospital except to repeatedly apologize and ask about his pain level. Now, as they prepared to leave the emergency room with a prescription for pain medication and instructions for follow-up care, Elena's guilt seemed to be weighing on her more heavily than ever. She stood near the doorway of the treatment room, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, watching as Marcus carefully tested his range of motion within the confines of his sling. "The doctor said I should be able to return to light training in about 3 weeks," Marcus said, trying to inject some optimism into the situation. "Maybe 4, if I want to be really careful about it." Elena nodded absently, but her expression remained troubled. She had been unusually quiet since they arrived at the hospital, and Marcus could see that she was struggling with something beyond simple concern for his injury. "Elena, seriously, I'm going to be fine," he said, standing up carefully and adjusting the sling that held his arm immobilized against his torso. "These things happen in martial arts. We both knew there were risks when we decided to spar." "No," Elena said firmly, her voice carrying a weight that made Marcus pause. "This wasn't just bad luck or an acceptable training accident. I made a serious error in judgment, and you're paying the price for my mistake." She moved closer to where he stood, her dark eyes intense with emotion. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. I've been teaching martial arts for over 15 years. I've trained thousands of students, from beginners to advanced competitors. In all that time, I have never seriously injured a student during controlled sparring." Marcus started to speak, but Elena held up her hand to stop him. "Let me finish. The reason I've never hurt anyone is because I've always been extremely careful about controlling distance, timing, and force. Tonight, I got caught up in how well you were responding to the challenge, and I forgot to maintain the safety margins that protect students like you." Her voice became quieter, more personal. "When I saw you improving so dramatically during our session, when I saw you starting to trust your instincts and flow naturally, I let my excitement override my judgment. I increased the intensity too much. Too fast. That uppercut should never have connected with the force it did." Marcus could see tears beginning to form in Elena's eyes, something he had never witnessed before. Throughout all the months of training, he had seen her be firm, encouraging, demanding, and even occasionally frustrated with students who weren't applying themselves. But he had never seen her vulnerable like this. "Marcus, I violated the most fundamental responsibility I have as an instructor: to keep my students safe while they're learning. And because of my failure, you're injured." The raw emotion in her voice was affecting Marcus more than his own physical pain. He could see that Elena was genuinely devastated by what had happened, and her obvious distress was making him feel worse than the injury itself. "Elena, stop," he said, reaching out instinctively with his left hand to comfort her. "You didn't fail me. If anything, this whole experience has shown me how much you care about your students." But Elena stepped forward before he could complete the gesture, her own emotions driving her to close the distance between them. She wrapped her arms around him in a heartfelt embrace, her need to express her remorse and seek some form of forgiveness overwhelming her usual professional boundaries. "I am so deeply sorry," she whispered against his shoulder. "I promise you, nothing like this will ever happen again." The hug was meant to be comforting, a genuine expression of Elena's regret and care for her injured student. But in her emotional state, she misjudged the position of his injured arm and the sensitivity of his shoulder joint. As Elena's arms came around him, her right hand inadvertently pressed against his injured shoulder blade, while her left arm pulled him closer. The combination of pressure and movement was exactly wrong for Marcus's compromised shoulder joint. Marcus felt something shift dramatically in his shoulder, a sensation that was completely different from the dull ache he had been experiencing since the fall. This was a sharp, nauseating displacement that sent shockwaves of agony through his entire upper body. He cried out involuntarily, a sound that was part surprise and part pure pain. Elena immediately released him. stepping back with horror as she realized what had just happened. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she said, her hands flying to her mouth as she watched Marcus's face go pale with shock. Marcus's right arm, which had been supported by the sling moments before, now hung at an unnatural angle. His shoulder had a distinctly different shape than it had just seconds earlier, and the pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced. I think you just dislocated my shoulder," Marcus managed to say through gritted teeth, leaning against the treatment table for support. Elena immediately pressed the call button for the medical staff, her face a mask of absolute horror at what she had inadvertently done. The irony was not lost on either of them. In trying to apologize for causing his injury, she had actually made it significantly worse. Dr. Walsh returned within minutes, took one look at Marcus's shoulder, and immediately called for additional medical staff. "We need to reduce this dislocation right away," she said, her professional demeanor masking any surprise she might have felt about this unexpected development. As Marcus was prepared for the procedure to relocate his shoulder joint, Elena stood in the corner of the room, looking like she wanted to disappear entirely. The woman who commanded respect and authority in the dojo now appeared small and devastated, crushed by the weight of having caused exactly the injury she had been apologizing for preventing. The next hour passed in a haze of medical procedures, pain medication, and careful manipulation of Marcus's shoulder joint. When it was finally over, his arm was back in a more restrictive sling, and his recovery time had been extended significantly. Elena insisted on driving him home, though she barely spoke during the 20-minute ride through the city streets. When they reached his apartment building, she helped him navigate the stairs to his third-floor unit, her assistance careful but her demeanor heavy with guilt. "Elena," Marcus said as they reached his door, "I know you're beating yourself up about this, but I need you to know something. What happened tonight doesn't change how I feel about my training or about you as an instructor." Elena looked at him with surprise. "How can you say that? I've injured you twice in one evening." Marcus fumbled with his keys, managing to unlock his door despite the awkward angle of his arm. "Because I know your heart. The reason you're so upset about this is the same reason you're such a good teacher. You genuinely care about your students' well-being." He paused in his doorway, looking back at Elena with complete sincerity. "When I'm healed and ready to return to training, I want to continue working with you. Tonight was a freak accident. Actually, tonight was 2 freak accidents. But that doesn't erase 8 months of excellent instruction and genuine care." Elena's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they seemed to contain relief as well as regret. "Are you absolutely sure about that?" Marcus nodded firmly. "I'm sure. Just promise me that next time you apologize, you'll keep your hands to yourself." Despite everything that had happened, Elena managed a small smile at his attempt at humor. "Deal," she said quietly. "And Marcus? Thank you for being more gracious about this than I deserve." As Elena disappeared down the stairwell and Marcus carefully navigated into his apartment, both of them knew that this strange and unfortunate evening had somehow strengthened their student-teacher relationship rather than destroying it. Sometimes, the most meaningful connections are forged in the most unexpected circumstances.